Doctors say that stress and anxiety play a huge role in people's eating habits. In fact, obesity is one of the leading risk factors for severe COVID symptoms as well. We wanted to explore all of this because we're trying to get healthy, trying to take care of folks. And joining us now, Dr. Jamie Zuckerman, a licensed clinical psychologist, to help us kind of work our way through this. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Appreciate you getting up with us this morning.
Sure.
I mean, I guess it seems like a kind of natural connection, but stress and anxiety, they affect people different ways. So how does it translate to our diet and overall physical well-being?
Sure. So I think what people sometimes don't realize is that when we're stressed and anxious, our bodies, they release certain chemicals, one of them being cortisol. And the more stressed and the more anxious we are, the more our body releases this chemical, which actually it stores fat and it stores carbohydrates and sugars. And so it actually makes us tend to gain weight when we're stressed and we're anxious. Our body thinks it's in survival mode. It's very aware of what's going on. And so it's essentially keeping us safe when it doesn't need to be.
You know, what's interesting, and I guess maybe it's a tangent because it's personal with me, but I was explaining to people in the studio, I tend to go the other way. When I'm really stressed, I don't have the ability to eat. You know, so it kind of, I guess it impacts different people different ways.
Yeah, and so when you actually don't eat, which is very common when you're stressed, I'm the same way. When I'm stressed, I don't eat. Our bodies go into survival mode still, and it hangs on to and stores fats, carbohydrates. So it actually has the same effect regardless.
Wow.
Yeah, it thinks we're in danger.
Same impact. Wow. Okay.
Same impact.
So what causes us to develop these unhealthy relationships with food, stress eating, or what have you?
So, you know, first and foremost is sometimes when we feel really stressed and really anxious, our bodies crave carbohydrates, they crave sugars, they crave fatty foods. That's where comfort food comes from. So in moderation, fine. But when we're constantly stressed and we're constantly anxious, we naturally crave those foods. And then what happens is we set up patterns, and then it just becomes a familiar habit. The other is how we grow up. You know, culturally and just in terms of family dynamics, food is looked at very differently. And so sometimes food is given as a reward. Sometimes lack of food is given as a reward. And it creates, again, these patterns and these cycles for us as, you know, when we go into adulthood, these patterns stick with us.
You know, it's interesting because I mean, the cravings and things, that's biological. So how do we then separate emotions from the food and separate these problem issues?
Sure. So the first is to become aware and mindful in the moment. We all hear about mindfulness and being present in the moment, but this is why it's so important, because we're on automatic pilot sometimes, especially when it comes to food and to eating. So we need to be very present, very aware in the moment when we're eating. Are we actually hungry? Most of the time when we eat separate from meals, we're not even hungry. We're bored, we're anxious, we're thirsty. So take inventory of your body and what's happening in the moment and be very aware of what you're doing. That will decrease it substantially, just that alone. The other is know what your triggers are. Know what your emotional triggers are. Know what you tend to do when you're sad, when you're anxious, when you're depressed, when you're stressed. What things do you do, and be mindful of those patterns and then replace them as you are going through them.
Can you quickly help me with how the sports at Eagles, it's an Eagles Sunday, the sports tends to mess with my emotional health?
Yes.
I need some tips.
What do you mean?